Hello and welcome to our WHRI Lunch and Learn on knowledge mobilization basics. My name is Nicole Prestley, and I'm the Knowledge Translation Specialist here at the Women's Health Research Institute, which basically means my job is to support research being co-produced with people that it's meant to serve, which makes me very happy. And I do this in a variety of ways that I'm hoping that I can chat with you about today over the next roughly 45 minutes. So apologies for having to hear me speak for that long. I do want to start by acknowledging that the WHRI operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And I do want to also further acknowledge the other First Nations territories that the WHRI forms relationships. What I'm hoping you folks will get out of today is to understand the importance of knowledge translation, define key knowledge mobilization terminology to set you on your path to knowledge translation, to differentiate between types of knowledge mobilization, and to understand some of the components of knowledge mobilization planning. A bit about me. So my role as the manager of research and knowledge translation, what I do on a day-to-day basis is support knowledge translation projects. So folks who have funding to really take research and move it into to being used by community. So I work with different research teams across the province. I also do capacity building for knowledge mobilization. So this is something I do via training and mentorship. I've also done some workshops for different research teams. I also work in a grants facilitation capacity. So Don MacArthur, who's the fearless leader at the RTDO, who, we do have our own grants facilitator coming soon again. I usually work with these folks to review KT plans that are in different grant applications, and I'll also provide review support for KT specific grants. And then I do partnership engagement. So thinking about who's conducting the research and who they want to use their research, and imagining who might need to be at the table in order to maximize the research use. And it's worth noting on our team, we do have a team of KT and communications folks. So Julia Santana Perea, who's currently on parental leave, is our qualitative and integrated knowledge translation specialist. We have Stella Luna, who's our new communications assistant, replacing Giselle. Sarah Sifo, who's our communications coordinator, and Cynthia Lynn, who's a research coordinator working on a project with a lot of knowledge translation focus. And so it's worth noting some of us folks are actually contracted out or built into some grant applications, provide that mentorship, and sometimes we're cost recovered for specific activities related to communications and KT. So what is knowledge translation? There's a multitude of ways to describe it. This first definition here is really is one that I like to use. It's from Michael Smith, Health Research BC, and it really just acknowledges that the activities aim to close the gap of research to practice, policy, and further research. So this further research is something that is important, in particular in the basic science space. It's also important because sometimes our research isn't ready for that social programming or that social or real world context. Sometimes we need to do more research. Sometimes we need to build a partnership before we can actually take that step further. There's also simpler ways to talk about KT, which is getting evidence into to use, and increasing the impact of research. Now, the impact piece, this language is something that's been criticized recently, kind of taking on a bit of a capitalist tone of why does everything need to have this return on investment? We should be doing it because it's the right thing to do. An even simpler way to think about knowledge translation or knowledge mobilization is as a bridge from research production and producers into a real world context. And this is the bridge I had the privilege of driving over this morning. Where does it come from? So health research is certainly not the first to talk about co-production of knowledge and use of knowledge. Communications, education, anthropology, marketing, and sociology have been leaders in this. And it is worth noting that even in this health space, and in particular with KT, we really are just seeing the value of these multidisciplinary approaches to our work and involving social sciences in health research. There are so many terms to describe knowledge translation. And this article, this is this is a very popular article by McGibbon that found 125 ways to describe knowledge translation. And this can be a huge barrier in doing knowledge translation. It can be very jargony, and I'll touch on that in the next slide as well, because there's different ways to describe knowledge translation depending on where you're located geographically. So dissemination and implementation is something that's used in the US. Research utilization is something that's used in the UK. And translational science is something that's used in Australia. And we just saw recently in the last year that CIHR is now moving towards knowledge mobilization as opposed to knowledge translation. And so here's 3 definitions. These are some of the popular terms of describing KT. So knowledge translation, knowledge exchange, and knowledge mobilization. And the highlights from each of these, KT, I like that it draws out that, synthesis, dissemination, ethically sound application of knowledge, and, that scope of improving the health of all Canadians. Knowledge exchange, it builds on that and really shows the commitment to creating a space and a culture and environment for the ethically sound application of knowledge and of research. And then knowledge mobilization takes it almost a step further by acknowledging that it needs to be reciprocal. It acknowledges co-production of knowledge, and it also acknowledges that knowledge doesn't always have to be produced within an academic setting, that we should be considering other ways that knowledge is produced and valuing that. Now, why is knowledge mobilization or knowledge translation important? There's many reasons why it's important. This first slide is really around accountability. Patients, providers, decision makers, policymakers are demanding better health outcomes, access to evidence-based information. We know that our funding agencies now require us to consider what are we going to do beyond academic dissemination, like publication presentations. So what could be some of the real world impact we see with our research. And then, this does actually bring about interest from researchers and the research community to engage in this new, space knowledge translation science. The other reason why is the 17-year gap. I mean, I can see H214 right now, like who knows about the 17-year gap, like show of hands, who's heard about it? Yeah, we're very, so essentially, yes, thank you, Ashton. So without the practice of KT, it can take approximately 17 years for research to get into practice or use. And even with that 17 years, this article found that only 14% of evidence-based interventions were being used. Now, with the practice of KT, we reduced that by 14 years. It's still 3 years, which can feel like a long time. And now that said, we've all also lived through a pandemic where we saw accelerated knowledge translation and sometimes removing, aspects of the peer review process. And so is 3 years still too long? Is rapid too short? And are we missing some important steps for adjudicating knowledge along the way? I think that remains to be seen. All of that's to say that take the 17-year gap with a grain of salt. Even how the 17-year gap has been sort of numerated, it's we've realized that how people define evidence being implemented depends on the group and the local setting. But there is sort of general consensus that yes, the practice of knowledge translation does improve health outcomes for people in general. These are what I call the sad statistics. And very real. So the fact that patients aren't getting evidence-based treatments, that they're not getting the information that they need to make informed decisions. 30% of them aren't getting effective treatments. 25 aren't getting ones that are useful, potentially harmful. So there are real world clinical implications to not doing knowledge translation. Now, context is key, and that last slide, is from 2009, and we're now in 2023. So the call to action and the catalyst for doing KT was established, and shortly after, our national and provincial funding agencies did respond. And now CIHR requires that knowledge users or people that we hope the research serves are engaged in the actual research itself. They also require knowledge translation plans. So there have been some sort of system level responses to what we know the gaps are in the health system by some of our funding agencies. Now, what counts as knowledge? So for those trained in sort of Western scientific methods, this pyramid is likely familiar to you, and kind of you go up the ladder, eventually reaching systematic reviews as kind of the gold standard of evidence. Now, the flaws to this model are that sometimes systematic reviews aren't always appropriate, as such when research is in an exploratory phase. So do we need to consider evidence in a particular context instead of waiting until the systematic review can be arrived at, and then we move towards implementation? And so this is more how it's going. So this more dynamic adjudication of knowledge and judgment of knowledge. So viewing knowledge in a particular context, and also considering things like the community that you're working with, their preferences and their experiences, and valuing experiences as knowledge as well. Incorporating things like political actions into how you adjudicate your knowledge, and local sources of knowledge. So not just a one-size-fits-all judgment. It's also important to think about different forms of knowledge, and this, comparison between what we know as scientific knowledge versus traditional knowledge, and thinking about how our assumptions and sometimes knee-jerk reactions to use to do things in a certain way because it's how they've been done, can sometimes reharm folks, and really sustain some of the systems of oppression that we know health research is connected to. And so thinking about the ways that traditional knowledge can be folded into the work that we do. And recognizing that ultimately knowledge is a judgment. It's a judgment call based on data and information. Now, something that I wanted to do, I did this with a workshop last month, is a what's your why? And I'd love to know what your whys are. But oftentimes we come into our professional spaces, and it's sort of assumed that we come in and we are just our professional selves, but we're not. We're whole beings, and we bring with our whole beings a range of experiences. And so just going to share a personal anecdote about what my why is, and why knowledge translation is something that I'm really passionate about. Um, in When my mom was, in her late 40s, she started experiencing these very strange symptoms: fatigue, inflammation, joint pain. And I'm sure everyone has an experience where they've been dismissed by the health system. And this was no different for my mom. She ended up having to retire early, and after about 5 years, finally got a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, so these autoimmune conditions. And after I graduated university, I ended up working at Arthritis Research Canada, and it was my first foray in research facilitation. And in Arthritis Research Canada was an arthritis patient advisory board. And it was a board made up of patients who had all different forms of arthritis, and they acted as co-investigators on research projects. They presented at conferences, they submitted abstracts, they co-authored papers, and they designed research studies. And you saw the effects of patient engagement at the start of evidence production. And I saw the outcome of different treatments being available for my mom and people who were living with the same condition. And so that was something that really gave me the passion to come into this space. And now Arthritis Research Canada, a lot of the folks that I worked with, I had the pleasure of working with, are now folded into Health Research BC as part of the BC support unit. So they have been, a real gold standard for setting the stage for patient-oriented research in BC. And then what drives me, as you'll see in this picture, is my Nona, or my mom, their Nona, and my two girls, Amelia and Ella. And, the women's health research space and women's health is so stigmatized that what drives me to continue in this space is knowing that we are making a difference by talking about the conditions that we're researching and supporting, and knowing that the importance of getting that evidence into the hands of people who need it. So if anyone's feeling brave online, and wants to share their why, I'd love to hear it. Okay, so now we go into the lexicon of knowledge translation. So this is where it gets a bit dry, but these are important, and it kind of goes back to all of the jargon that exists in knowledge translation and why it's important to kind of have these terms at the ready when we're writing grants, and planning our KT activities. So knowledge users, these are the people that you are most likely, that you think most likely are going to use the knowledge that you're creating. These are also people who are very essential to you wanting to achieve your KT goals, or what you want your research to do once you've completed that project. Project partners are the people who really enable your knowledge translation work. So best practice is that you would have a knowledge user represented as a project partner on your team. You may also have project partners who have access to the knowledge users that you want to engage with at the end of your project. Diffusion and dissemination, these are two different types of KT activities. While diffusion, arguably not. Diffusion, you can really think about this as passive. That's why you see the little sleeping person. So this is really, there's no intention behind what we're doing with our research results. We're doing what we always do. We're not doing it for a particular reason or to reach anyone in particular. Whereas dissemination, this is something that's typically done at the end of a project, and it's done with intentionality. So it may be that there are academic activities that are fueling your dissemination, like publication and presentation, but you've identified that you want to reach a particular audience with the information that you're disseminating. So it is more active and intentional versus diffusion, which is passive. These are also two different types of knowledge translation. So end of grant KT, again, is that you finished your study, you have your results, you want to develop a plan. A lot of folks see themselves in this when they apply for a REACH award through Michael Smith. So your project is done, but you've realized you need more resources to engage with a particular group. So you may submit for additional funding to do more end of grant KT. Whereas integrated knowledge translation is exactly what it sounds. It's literally integrating the practice of KT into every phase of the research process. And this is one way to visualize it. So this sort of orange part where we have promotion of research results, this is really where you see end of grant KT, whereas integrated knowledge translation is happening at every phase of this research process. Participatory action research, sometimes this is conflated with integrated knowledge translation, and they are very distinct. In fact, integrated knowledge translation borrowed from participatory action research, and it is distinct. Participatory action research is typically grassroots, community-driven. It has roots in feminist theory and social justice, so it doesn't happen within it doesn't have to happen within an academic setting. And yeah, focuses on opportunities for social action and social change. Different types of implementation. So implementation practice is really as part of the knowledge mobilization or the knowledge to action cycle that Ian Graham created. This is that one piece that once you get your evidence to a robust state, you're ready to start practicing your implementation. So you enable strategies to get your evidence into use. Whereas implementation science is the actual study of using these strategies, theories, and frameworks so implementation practice, you can evaluate. Implementation science is more is an enhanced scope. It's not just about evaluating your implementation strategy. One way to illustrate this is hand hygiene. So you may want to look at you may study whether reminders to physicians were effective at increasing hand washing. And so in this case, obviously you want to see the increase in hand washing, but you may be studying whether the use of reminders was actually an effective strategy to measuring that increase. KT science is an umbrella term. So implementation science, we just talked about. KT science is a way to kind of capture other forms of science within knowledge translation. So dissemination science is something included within this, as is integrated knowledge translation science. And implementation science can be included in this. It just is also its own distinct thing. And then knowledge brokers. So this is another human being. These are people who you can think of them as like a human bridge. So someone who can act as a linkage agent between two groups. So they may be connected to researchers and policymakers. They may be connected to researchers and community. And their role is really to foster alignment, to really show that the alignment of the goals of the two different groups, and do that in tailored language through project management, and a lot of these competencies that are a part of knowledge brokering, we're seeing come up more and more now in job descriptions. So it's an exciting time for KT that some of the skills that we need for this are actually being recognized from an HR point of view. These are also really helpful if you are writing grants, to think about incorporating knowledge broker type activities into your grants. And I'd be happy if anyone is at that point, to share knowledge brokering like job descriptions. I have a bank of them that I've been keeping. So where do you start? You start with process and planning. And so these are two usual suspects, the knowledge to action framework or cycle on the left, from Ian Graham, and then the knowledge translation planning template. This was developed by Melanie Barwick at Sick Kids in Toronto. The knowledge translation planning template is very, very comprehensive. And so, so what I've done for this presentation is actually distill, I think it's about 13 sections into just 5 components of KT planning. But first, why? I don't want you to assume that, you're taking my word at gospel. Why on earth are you going to ask us to do knowledge translation planning, Nicole? That seems like a lot of work, 13 sections. There are huge benefits to KT planning, even if it's not as part of a grant, even if you're not applying for a grant application. KT planning in general, even if you're in the middle of a project, can help you see opportunities for partnership, opportunities for dissemination, opportunities for more impact of your research. And sometimes they don't require a ton of extra resources. So yes, so it can identify and operationalize your goals. It can align your goals with particular strategies. It can enable you to do evaluation. So making sure that you doing the things that you want to do in KT actually make an impact. It can also, very importantly, help you think about resources that you need and plan for sustainability. So how do you continue to do this work even after this world of research where we're grant funded and the project ends? So these are the 5 components to KT planning, my simplified version of KT planning. What are your goals? Who should be involved? So the people. What are the strategies that you're going to use? How will you measure success? And what resources do you need? The first thing you want to think about before you start articulating your KT goals are, what is it that you want to share? Are you sharing new knowledge? Are you sharing new practices? Are you sharing a process where you developed something new and you'd like to share it with a group? Are you sharing results or evidence? Then you want to think about what your goals are. And these are some basic ones to get folks started, where in form, you may want to make others aware of your knowledge, your results, your findings. You may also want to engage people. You may want to get feedback on a particular topic, or you may want to generate a new partnership. You may also want to implement. So this actually involves a behavior change. This involves people doing something new. So implementation is something that typically requires a lot of resources, requires a lot of buy-in from whichever group you're hoping that behavior change to occur. And something important to distinguish between are your research objectives and your KT objectives or goals. So your research objectives are addressing a particular gap in knowledge, whereas your KT goals are what do you want to do with the knowledge that you found? So this example of, one research objective, discovering the benefits of delayed cord clamp on infant health 6 months post-birth. So depending on the results of the project, one of the KT goals could be to change practice in OBGYNs. Another KT goal could be to generate awareness of the use of cord clamp in people who are pregnant, because they could also advocate for that practice change. So there's different ways to identify your KT goals, and you can have multiple goals with your KT plan. So people, who do you need to involve to achieve your goals? There's 3 types of people. We've talked about the first 2, so your knowledge users, so who will use the information you're producing, your project partners, who can help you reach your goals, and then your team. This is a very, very important one. Who is going to do the work? This is another, so this is a screenshot from the KT planning template, which has a variety of project partners listed and knowledge users listed. This is a great resource, but you can also go more in depth than this. So if researchers are a group that you want to target as a knowledge user, you can also get more specific than just researchers. There may be, a particular discipline. Maybe you're a basic scientist and you want to engage with more translational scientists or clinical research folks. You may want to identify particular research disciplines that you want to partner with. Or if there's researchers at a different stage in their career, such as early career researchers that you'd like to share an evolving science with to show opportunity that exists for academics. Strategies. So how will you achieve your goal? This is a great resource. All these links will, I'll send a list of links for folks to use after this, but this is a list of KT strategies that are aligned, and these are evidence-based, that are aligned with different knowledge user types. So these are very much health system focused, but it literally takes different KT strategies around audit and feedback, reminders, education, and breaks it down by decision maker, healthcare provider, the public, patients and family, and researchers as to their effectiveness. So one of the reasons why this is important is if you are writing a grant and there is knowledge translation work being written into that grant, sometimes with KT, we have to make assumptions about what we're going to do with our findings. And we have to, in that planning, we have to articulate strategies to align with what we're going to do. This is a great resource to sort of give you credibility about choosing certain strategies to achieve your KT goals. They're also very helpful. And the KT planning template has a variety of KT strategies that actually are under the umbrella of each KT goal. So facilitating policy change. So this one, the policy change one of the resources that I use is the National Center for National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. They have a phenomenal library of policy briefs, institutional memos, all of these templates that you can download and kind of work within your own space if that's in your sort of KT goal wheelhouse. There's also a lot more creative knowledge mobilization efforts and strategies. So what I'm seeing, hearing from folks is aspects of storytelling and also gamification in some of the KT strategies that are being chosen. And, social media is still a popular one. The one thing I will say with social, we often get very, excited folks that want to start their own, lab Instagram or Twitter. And I mean, Twitter is its own environment right now. But I'd say think about first who you want to reach with each of your strategies, because sometimes community partnerships actually make more sense than creating your own new channel. One note I did want to make on videos is that there is some research now suggesting that videos can aid comprehension and increase recall and subject matter attitudes. So they are proving to be quite an effective KT tool. And then also using spoken narration in videos can better enable things like translation. So whiteboard animation videos, but then overlaying narration can allow you to then reproduce that video in different languages. So just thinking about equity and translation as we build in some of our KT strategies. Yeah, and these are just some questions to consider when you're thinking about your strategies. So who your audience is, who are your knowledge users, tailoring your language. I think folks are mostly familiar with things like plain language and clear language, and there's some great resources on governmental websites that speak to that. But you may not always have a public audience, so plain language is not always needed. You can tailor your language to the audience that you're engaging with. The meeting the knowledge users where they are, this is kind of goes back to my previous comment about social media, and we don't always need to create a new space. Sometimes others are already in that space, and building a partnership will actually benefit the people who you're trying to reach and the research that you're trying to conduct in the long term. And then these last two bullets tie into the next section, which is going to touch on evaluation. So you can have several strategies, just pay attention to them and monitor those, and you can adapt those as you go. So evaluation is really about how do we know that we achieved our KT goal? So evaluation, I mean, most folks I'm sure are familiar. There's, process evaluation. There's also outcome evaluation. So your outcome evaluation may measure, did we do the thing that we set out to do? So did we generate awareness? Yes, we did generate awareness. And these are some of the ways that we can show that we did generate awareness, whether it's we sold tickets to an art show and 200 people came, or we had this key performance indicator on social media of engagement or reach that shows that our outcome was achieved. Process is really monitoring and evaluating, when did you implement your strategy, and did it make a change? So did it gain new followers on social? Did your resource kit get downloaded more? And if not, being agile and adapting those strategies, asking your knowledge users who are on your project how they would advise with the knowledge translation strategies is another great way to monitor and adapt. The other thing too is thinking about sustaining use of your knowledge. So, for those folks who are creating knowledge products like videos or creating a website, social media, how are you going to maintain that? Websites cost money to maintain. Social media, you need a human being creating graphics and posting. So just being sure to build some of that into future funding competitions that you apply for. And there's a multitude of ways to measure success in the evaluation space. These are some. I mean, attitude change is very difficult in a low resource setting, but you can do things like surveys to groups. The partnerships thing is one that I like to flag for people because it's a very low barrier. if you are kind of always calling out for collaborations over the course of a project, just save those emails. Save the emails from the people that you've engaged with. And at whatever point you can, put them all into a spreadsheet. Those are all people who are new, who you formed a relationship with, and you can show sort of the impact of outreach that you've done within your KT work. Resources, so how are you going to do the things that you want to do? This really goes back to the people who is responsible for the KT activities. So who's going to take on that sort of knowledge translation, the broker or the KT specialist role. What other resources do you need? So have you talked about different strategies or knowledge products that you want to create, like videos, and how do you budget for those? The one thing I will say, especially in the creative KT space of like podcasts and arts-based KT, there's tons of folks who are doing this already. And so this is when reaching out to our peers to ask, how much did your infographic cost? How much did your whiteboard animation video cost? How long was your whiteboard animation video? So that we can all learn from one another about our own KT strategies and knowledge products that we create. And then, yeah, thinking about how long you need these resources for. I mean, sustainability is so important. And, as much as I'd love to say, yes, I think, let me reword this. Resources are limited to our funding periods, which can be a major constraint. The other things you want to think about with resources is once the evidence changes, who's responsible for updating it? So, as we know in research, findings shift and knowledge needs to shift with it. So what additional resources, which can sometimes be partnerships, should you think about establishing so that your knowledge is sustained and updated over time? And then just a few little pieces for those who might be curious to continue their KT learning journey. These are some local resources. So the UBC Knowledge Exchange Group, which is led by Dr. Jen Creighton, is phenomenal. They just hosted a partnering in research conference out at UBC. They're an excellent, excellent resource. They've hosted some workshops around equity-focused knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization. SFU Knowledge Mobilization, this is led by Dr. Lupin Battersby. They also offer, I think, monthly lunch and learns that are knowledge mobilization focused, and they are open to everyone. So you don't just have to be an SFU student or faculty member to attend. The BC Support Unit, so under Health Research BC, these folks have a ton of KT expertise. And, I've worked really closely with Alia Janwala in the Support Unit Fraser Center. So depending on where you are located and where your research is located, you can reach out to the different support units across BC. And then Michael Smith, Health Research BC, they are sort of the stewards of a KT collaborative. So this is a group of KT professionals across the province and truly across the province. We meet every 6 weeks virtually. We talk about KT projects that we're working on. We all talk about KT challenges that we're experiencing. It is exactly how it sounds. It's really collaborative. And I tend to learn a lot from each of those meetings. There's some good tools also through Michael Smith. I promise I'm not getting a stipend from them. KT Pathways is a way of assessing KT competencies. So if you want to kind of see where you're at on the knowledge translation scale, you can do your own assessment. There's also an awesome resource library there. So if you are looking for different KT tools, that's a great place to start. They also offer webinars. So these are called KT Connects, and these are real life, researchers that I think many of us know, who kind of share their reflections and lessons learned around the practice and science of KT. Podcasts. David Phipps is one of my favorite knowledge translation people. He's at York University. This podcast is fantastic, as is the Knowledge Mobilization for Policy Impact with Petra Molnar. Both of these really touch on the importance of recognizing knowledge that's created outside of the academy. They also talk about the importance of qualitative research methods, in particular with knowledge translation. What we're trying to understand is how someone experiences something. And so the importance of qualitative research methods is just integral to understanding this. And funding, obviously, very important. So there are specific funding calls available for knowledge translation activities. So Michael Smith has their annual convening and collaborating and then REACH program. So these are $15,000. The CIHR has planning and dissemination grants. So these vary in size depending on the institute they're affiliated with. So sometimes they're only $10,000. Sometimes they can be up to $20,000 or $25,000 depending on the institute that they're under. There's one coming up in next week, I think it's due. And I think they have about 2 of these a year. And then UBC also has community engagement funds. These are small events, but to facilitate partnerships. So this is disseminating research findings, developing research priorities, enabling new partnerships in a program of research are all sort of appropriate scope for this. Additionally, a WHRI plug, our Catalyst Grant competition is open currently. So this is something that could be suitable for an implementation science project. And maybe I'll as a step back, if you are interested in applying, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to chat with you or your team and help formulate your proposal. Acknowledgements. I do want to just thank Michael Smith, Health Research BC. I was very lucky to be invited to their pilot Train the Trainer program, where Michael Smith did acknowledge that oftentimes we were outsourcing a lot of our KT expertise to Toronto, and they said, let's create something in BC that enables capacity building here in our own backyard. And so they have operationalized that program. I think it is being reimagined, and there is a program upcoming for formal training in KT between UBC and SFU. So as soon as I hear an update on that, I'll be sure to share it with everyone. And then the BC Support Unit Fraser Center, I mentioned Alia Janwala, who I've worked with closely. And so just a shout out to her because we've collaborated and co-developed this slide deck together. And thank you. I'm happy to open it up to questions and also hear what's your why. Hi, Fritha.
Hi, Nicole. Thanks. Yeah, I'm Fritha. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. I am still reflecting on what's my why question, so maybe I can come back to that one later. But I was wondering if you could speak at all to how you look at quality improvement related projects when it comes to knowledge translation at the Institute, or if you differentiate at all, or why or why not, if you could just speak to that a little bit. I know a lot of the methodologies are very similar and overlap for QI and integrated KT projects.
Yeah, the QI QA space is something we talk about often. And I mean, I think I'll say there's tension between sort of big R and little r research, we call it, and quality improvement. And I do work closely with folks in the quality improvement space to kind of determine what are the KT goals. And that's really what kind of sets the stage for the next steps, and whether there is broader dissemination outside of the local context. And there is also KT strategy that can be employed even within the local context. So, I mean, the short answer is KT can be employed in a QIQA setting, absolutely. There are different methodologies, though, depending on the goals. Is there a specific like example that you wanted to share? Oh, I think she left. Yes, Ashton, I will share the links. I can also share the slides. There, nothing is proprietary in here. And I think we'll be posting the talk as well. Hi, Beth. I see you. I think the room is muted. Let me unmute you. Let's see. Oh, I can hear you now.
Okay. You mentioned this a little bit in the presentation, but can you briefly just explain what the difference between integrated KT and KT is, and like how those two things, what makes it integrated versus not?
Yeah, great question. Integrated knowledge translation, the difference. So what we sort of use to distinguish the two is end of grant KT and integrated KT. So integrated KT would be you've identified your knowledge users, your potential knowledge users, and you are actually engaging those people in all of these different phases of the research process. So you're designing a protocol, you're writing a grant, you're engaging those folks. You are developing your data collection instruments, you're engaging those folks. You're designing recruitment strategies, you're engaging those folks, all the way into data analysis, interpretation, reporting. And I will say, maybe I'll just put a caveat in, there sometimes it's not always a good use of the knowledge user's time to be a part of every aspect of the research process. And so what I say to most teams is just ask them. One, you can find out their skills, sort of their skill set, and how they want to be involved, and let that and the goals of the project kind of inform when you involve them and what parts of the research process you involve them in.
So it's a bit of an overlap with participatory research and patient-oriented research.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's just the distinction between participatory action research is the sort of social justice, feminist theory, community driven. I think integrated KT has borrowed from PAR, and more to serve, like, to also recognize what we can do within this sort of health research setting. But still, yeah, absolutely, community engagement throughout the research process, but not necessarily with that like social justice and advocacy tone. Did that answer your question? Okay. Anyone else in H214? All right. Okay, folks. Travis, you got a question?
Yeah, just because it might be a bit of a weird one, but I kind of, as you're talking about kind of like social justice in KT, I was kind of thinking about, it kind of made me think about other concepts that are kind of thrown around at the same time. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about incorporating things like mutual aid into KT theory. Because I was kind of thinking about it as like, so just for those of you who might not be aware, mutual aid is kind of an organizational theory where there's like this reciprocal knowledge exchange that's going on. Oftentimes it's referred to in more tangible ways like volunteering or the like, but I was kind of thinking about it more in like a KT respect as well. And if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, it sounds like I don't know much about mutual aid. I guess based on what you've just described, that does sound aligned with what we're sort of moving towards in Canada with knowledge mobilization and recognizing reciprocity, that it's not just the researcher getting something out of the research itself, that it's also serving the people who it's meant to serve, and that they're a part of the process.
Right. Okay. I mean, that does kind of sound like what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, it's recognition that we aren't, that it's a privilege to be an academic, and also that we're sort of following the lead of our community partners and asking them what they need, and how they want to be engaged in the work in order for it to be meaningful for them.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks, everyone.
See you next month. Oh, and next month, yeah, so next month we have the digital health team who I see on my screen
Yay.
right now. Sally and Haneen, and I know Beth just had to jet out, but yeah, we're very excited to have you folks there. And just so everyone is aware, starting in September, we are going to be co-hosting. So we've been doing a lunch and learn. BC Children's Hospital Research Institute has been doing a lunch and learn. And so we're going to be doing a collaborative lunch and learn starting in September that's available to everyone on the Oak Street campus, everyone who's a part of WHRI. So stay tuned. Yeah, stay tuned for that. We'll be showcasing that likely in our September newsletter. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you at rounds.